Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Eumans2020, How Citizens Can Change Europe. Thanks for everyone who joined us at the European Economic and Social Committee, where we are this morning, and for those who are following us online on Facebook and YouTube live streaming. So after the session that we had yesterday, which was mainly focused on technological, scientific challenges and solutions led by citizens, the focus of today is on social and fundamental rights. And again, how citizens can lead a process of reforms through participatory democracy. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, cool. We have a few sessions today. We will start with Niccolò Milanese, who is director of European Alternatives, which is actually one of the organizations who promoted this event together with Science for Democracy, Associazione Luca Coscioni, Humans, the ESIT Foundation, and the Centre d'Action Like. And we agreed to kick off this morning with a focus on the role of information in the participation of citizens in democratic processes, because ultimately knowledge is what is needed to act. So Niccolò is going to do an introductory relation on the topic. We will keep some space for a quick round of Q&A with him, and then we will move to the panel on the rule of law, which we'll explore later on. So I'd say the chair is yours. Thank you, Niccolò.
Well, thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about information, I think in the context of the state of European democracy, but also with a bit of a reflection on running European Citizens Initiatives, because European Alternatives ran a European Citizens Initiative on media freedom and pluralism several years ago, which I will try to share some experiences about. But I want to start today by reflecting on something which is quite important to me, which took up most of yesterday, that is to say the UK elections. One of my nationalities is British, and you've all seen the results this morning. What you've probably also seen is that the campaign, the debate in the UK was, again, highly dominated by misinformation, by media manipulation. Indeed, independent studies showed that up to 88% of the messages sent out online by the Conservative Party were misleading or false. 88%. And not only is this statistic shocking, the same study found that 0% of the Labour Party online messages were misleading or false, and some small percentage of the Liberal Democrat messages were misleading or false. But not only is this statistic shocking, but the way that this independent study was reported in the UK press was also shocking. The BBC, for example, the public broadcaster, simply reported that online messages from political parties are misleading, without making it clear that they were much more misleading of one of the parties than the other parties. And they do this under the pretense of neutrality in the elections, which is, of course, an important principle, but it's clear that this principle can be manipulated by those in political power to prevent bad news about themselves coming out. And this is only the most shocking, one of the most shocking examples of media manipulation in the UK. Overall, the election campaign looked like a repeat of the referendum campaign, where total falsities went largely unchallenged and were simply repeated by a Murdoch-dominated press and a public media which is far too close to political power. And so it seems as though almost nothing was learnt in the process between 2016 and today. And I want to say here in particular that the European Union and the European Commission can't just pretend that everything that happens in the UK is totally irrelevant to it. They can't just say, well, it's a UK problem. We've got nothing to do with it. That's firstly not true. It's a member state. And secondly, what happens in the UK, like what happens in other countries in Europe, will have a massive effect on what happens in the rest of the European Union. It's a big economy, amongst anything else. The influence of UK and English language media is huge across the European Union. And so what happens in the media landscape and its relationship with democracy in the UK should be an important subject of debate for the European institutions, but these last years they have shied away from it. Now, I want to rewind to when European Alternatives, my organisation, started to become interested in these questions, which was in the period of 2009 or so. We were campaigning in the European Parliament for the European Parliament to take a stand on the concentration of media in Italy. In Berlusconi's Italy, you all know what that is about. And our argument then was, look, if we allow this to happen in a country like Italy, this will be a kind of virus or gangrene which will spread through other European countries. We pushed for a resolution in the European Parliament. There was a vote on the resolution, you might remember, in 2009. That vote was basically tied. So the resolution didn't pass. The EPP was playing its usual game of protecting one of its most important members. But we continued to talk about this topic, and in 2012 we launched a citizens' initiative on media pluralism. It was one of the first European citizens' initiatives that was launched, and we thought it was important to launch a European citizens' initiative on media freedom and pluralism for at least two reasons. One reason was, if you want to have participatory democracy in Europe, you need to make sure there's good quality information for the citizens to properly engage, and so media freedom is directly related to the possibility of having a European Citizens Initiative functioning properly. And secondly, because we thought that if we could involve journalists and the media in one of the first European Citizens Initiatives, we would perhaps build an awareness inside the media about what European Citizens Initiatives were about, and so that would be something useful for European Citizens Initiatives in general. So those were two of our reasons for thinking it important to launch on this topic early on in the European Citizens Initiative existence. Aside from the fact that the topic itself was very important. By 2012, it was not only Berlusconi that was a big issue when it comes to media freedom, but the media law in Hungary was a big topic of discussion. The attempt of Orban to appoint the people overseeing Hungarian media in a political way was a great topic of discussion here in Brussels. And I would say that the ECI that we ran, which was unsuccessful, and I'll come to some of the reasons why it was unsuccessful, in the sense we didn't collect 1 million signatures, we collected 250,000 signatures. I'll come to the reasons why that was. But the ECI was part of a wave of people realizing that the European institutions had to take a slightly stronger stance on rule of law and European values issues. Now, from my perspective, and I guess most of our perspectives, the European institutions have come to that realization way too late. But it was part of a move that I think the European Citizens Initiative contributed to. One of the big battles we had at the time in registering the European Citizens Initiative, as you might know, is that the Commission was very strict in only accepting initiatives that clearly fell under the competencies of the European Commission. So one had to make a strong argument why what we were asking to do was potentially inside the competencies of the Commission. And this was not at all clear. This was not at all clear in 2012, because the Commission had very often said in debates about Berlusconi's Italy, amongst others, that media freedom was not really an issue it could have competencies over. And so we worked with the European University Institute to make the strongest legal case we could for why media pluralism is an important potential part of the European Commission's competencies. And that argument was based on the single market and anti-competition laws. So you can't have media monopolies and you can't shut other media out of a national market. That was part of the argument. And the Audiovisual directive, which gives the European Commission some competencies when it comes to... Doesn't want me to... This always happens when I come to the... yeah, someone's listening. Audiovisual directive, which gave some competencies to the Commission when it comes to ensuring the plurality of cultures. And so we made an argument that plurality of media is important when it comes to promoting plurality of culture. So these were two arguments we used to get the Commission to recognize that, yes, media freedom and pluralism is potentially inside its competencies. That was already a victory back in 2012. That they said, yes, actually, maybe we do have some competencies over this issue. But the fact that we had to go this rather indirect route through single market rules and the Audiovisual directive posed some difficulties for us when it came to explaining to journalists and media and also citizens what it was we were trying to do, because we were wanting to make quite simple arguments about the importance of media freedom and pluralism. But then when people asked for details about how we thought the European institutions ought to protect and promote that, we had to make these arguments through European legislation which some people found quite troubling. And that was something we underestimated when we naively thought that mass media might be interested in promoting media pluralism. Many of the most powerful newspapers and television stations, of course, it now seems, were not that interested in media pluralism. They were interested in preserving their dominant position. And lots of people were very skeptical about the idea that European legislation promoting more of a free market, shall we say, in media would actually be a good thing. And so this legal framing posed us some difficulties. The other difficulties that we had with the ECI, I think, are probably familiar to anyone who knows about the ECIs. Back at the time, it was extremely difficult to set up the online collection system to collect the signatures because the Commission made a mess. So this took a lot of time. People were generally unaware of what the ECIs were. We were working with a number of funding foundations to run the ECI. It takes a lot of resources to collect 1 million signatures, and it was clear that the foundations were very unfamiliar with how the whole thing should work, and so this posed us sort of operational problems in organising the ECI. But as I said, despite not getting 1 million signatures, and I think that as you know, even if you get 1 million signatures as an ECI, doesn't guarantee anything happens. So perhaps the important thing is not getting 1 million signatures. The important thing is, what do you manage to achieve? And we can say that we managed to achieve at least 3 things. One was the Commission admitting kind of clearly that media freedom and pluralism was potentially part of its competencies, and we noticed a shift in what the Commission was saying. The second was that there is now, and has been since 2017, a media monitor run by the European University Institute, paid for by the European Commission, which monitors the situation of media freedom and pluralism in the different European countries. So we had been working with the European University Institute to make the legal case, and one of the things we were arguing for in the ECI was a media monitor. And now that media monitor exists, the next stage would be the Commission or someone acting on what the media monitor finds when it sees that there's a problem. So, but at least it exists. And these days, I mean, if you just look a couple of days ago on the International Day of Human Rights, these days the Commission is quite clear that freedom of expression and media freedom are part of human rights. The Commission Twitter accounts were saying that quite clearly these last days, and so that's a shift that we contributed to, I would like to think, with the ECI. Now, having shared that experience from a few years ago, I want to have just a couple of reflections on today, and then leave plenty of time for discussion. One thing that was already clear in 2012 and has become more and more clear with the Orbanification of European politics is that it's not just one sector or one kind of campaign that can change the situation in a country or for European democracy as a whole. As you will probably know, Orban was able to adapt the media law that was contested back in 2012, 2013, so that it was acceptable for the European institutions. This hasn't prevented Orban from having a domination over the media. And this situation is the same in other countries, and it shows that we need to have a holistic approach to democracy and both protecting and advancing democracy. It's not just about the media or about the way the judges are appointed or about the quality of online information or about shutting down of NGOs. You need to look at the whole picture to make an assessment of the ways that democracy is being systematically undermined in some European countries. And that means that NGOs need to work together. And, for example, ECIs need to work together and see the links between themselves so that we're making a systematic and comprehensive defense of democracy rather than just looking at individual angles of it. If I compare the situation now with 2012, when we ran the media initiative, of course, one of the big things that has changed in the public debate, but also in reality, is the degree and the public awareness of online misinformation has exploded over the past years, and I would say that the interlinkages between online disinformation, what's reported in the media, in the rest of the media, and what then is fed back into the political debate, this has all become much more enmeshed. So whereas there was already online disinformation happening in 2012, now, and you could really see it if you were following the UK debates these last days, the way that online information was immediately picked up by mass media, which was then repeated back by politicians, which was then this whole system of misinformation is now not something that can be dealt with just by dealing with the online component or just by dealing with the print component or so on. One needs to look at the whole information landscape and acknowledge that the fight for those of us who are trying to promote, shall we say, the truth or some sort of facts and facts checking inside amongst information providers is very tough in comparison with those who are trying to undermine truth and facts in the information environment, because all they need to achieve is installing some doubt that there is anything like truth or falsity. At the moment they can spread some idea that actually everything is contestable, they've spread doubt in people's mind that anybody can be trusted. Whereas those of us who want to promote the idea that no, there are some facts that you can check, this has to be demonstrated in quite a forceful way to combat the growing skepticism and cynicism of many citizens. Now, I think the EU, to its credit, and having lived in the UK, well, being British, I know that we have to also defend the EU as well as criticise it. Otherwise, look what happens. The EU, to its credit, has perhaps been the most active level of governance inside the European Union to try to do something about online disinformation and start to think about media pluralism issues over these past years, but it hasn't moved quickly enough to action, and I think arguably as well it hasn't involved the right actors in the conversations about how to deal with these things. It's often tried to go directly to the biggest actors, like having a conversation with Facebook about what they can do, rather than empowering smaller, shall I say, grassroots, citizen-led initiatives, which actually seem to me to be a really important part of having a diverse media landscape filled with enough people committed to finding and reporting the truth. I don't say that one shouldn't be having conversations as well with the big players, but I think relying only on the big players is quite a naive approach to promoting media freedom and pluralism. So I think that if one's wanting to talk about European citizenship, I think that European citizens should see fighting for free media and media pluralism as an integral part of their civic duty to uphold democracy. And that also means setting up and supporting alternative and civic media platforms. And I think that the European Commission should promote this vision of active citizenship for the 21st century as well. I think I leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much also because you covered basically all the topics of the day with a great kind of trait d'union. I just also want to mention, maybe for those who didn't follow the session yesterday, that as part of the discussion today, but also the discussion yesterday, we are working with other European citizen initiatives promoters with the goal of asking for equal dignity for participatory democracy, as well as representative democracy and traditional democracy. And this is going to be part of the conversation today. So I'd say now we move to the first panel.